Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's cybersecurity panel discussion. My name is Elaine Wang. I'm the Cloud Solutions Director at Rectron. Cybersecurity attacks in recent years have received a lot of press, both locally as well as internationally, and it's no longer just big businesses that are being targeted, but even small businesses. Accenture last year released a report that they conducted on South Africa, and they found that South Africa has the third most cybercrime victims in the world, which resulted in a loss of about 2.2 billion rand a year. That number is so staggering. Given this, we thought it was really important that as Rectron and as the supporter of the channel, that we assemble some of the experts in our vendor ecosystem to discuss cybersecurity, since it's our job to help you to bring the right solutions to South African organizations. So before we get started, let's actually just do a round of introductions and let's get everyone to introduce themselves. Shall we start with you, Akona?
Thank you, Elaine. Hi, everyone. My name is Akona Galishane. I work at Rectron as a RCT Cloud Solution Specialist. Cybersecurity and security in general for me is very important, as it's one of the most things that I actually focus on all my solutions that I offer to my clients. So I'm looking forward to hearing what everyone has to say here on this call.
Okay, why don't we hand over to Michelle?
Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle. I am a territory channel manager at Microsoft for modern work and security. So definitely security is something that is top of mind and within our DNA in modern workplace. Very nice to meet everyone and looking forward to the discussion.
Great, thank you, Michelle. Let's do Simon next.
Hi, I'm Simon Perry. I'm representing Bitdefender. I do the pre-sales for Bitdefender in country, so look after some of the sort of SME sort of customers and sort of positioning what controls and security should be put at those customers.
Thank you, Simon. And last but not least, Mr. Nick Keane.
Hi, good morning. My name is Nick Keane. I am representing Acronis, and I am a sales/pre-sales engineer in the sub-Saharan African region, as well as sub-Saharan African region for Acronis, just helping customers spec out their systems, implement and understand the general risks around data protection and cyber protection.
Thank you, everyone. Okay, so let's get started with some of our questions today. I really urge the audience to please ask questions if you do have anything, and we'll see if we can maybe weave them into the discussion, or if not, we'll ask them to our speakers right at the end. Simon, let's start with you. This cyber threat landscape is so complicated and it's advancing so rapidly. It seems like every day we're hearing about something new. So what are the biggest threats that you're actually seeing in the market right now as Bitdefender? And have you seen an upsurge of attacks during the pandemic?
Yeah, so I think one of the key things that we've probably been noticing is really a lot of the phishing attacks that are coming into place. I think there have been studies specifically with COVID, with a lot of the phishing campaigns, targeting that, and I think the studies came back with a 600% growth on those phishing campaigns. With also with the elections and the last few weeks, there's been some type of high sort of, I guess, attacks that are being seen from that point of view. And some of the other areas that we sort of also have to look at is the mobile security. I mean, guys are forgetting about actually securing their mobile phones, and a lot of I guess users out there are downloading free apps and stuff like that, and they're sort of not taking into account on how secure those apps are, and that sometimes causes a bit of an issue. And then I guess one of the big points is really the targeted ransom attacks. I mean, the targeted ransom attacks specifically focusing trying to get I guess an advanced persistent threat into an organization, trying to actually I guess get a ransom out of those customers is probably one of the main things that we're seeing in today's. And I think a lot of the ransomware attacks that we're seeing are really trying to focus on and go after the healthcare side of things, and actually trying to do a data breach on that, which is probably not the the right time to be doing that, but you know, the guys are trying to make money off it, which is a big concern.
Sure, that's absolutely a big concern, especially given that our health institutions are so important right now. I think what you mentioned about the election, the American elections, is really interesting. I guess the attackers are where there's traffic, right? So it makes sense that, you know, that you're seeing a lot of attacks around what people are searching for. Nick, let's hand over to you. So in my intro, I mentioned that as a country, we rank number 3 in terms of cybercrime, well, victims of cybercrime. So we're clearly being targeted as South Africans. But in your experience, what kinds of organizations are more likely to be targeted? And how risky, how much at risk are businesses here actually?
That's a good question. I would say most, if not all, companies are at risk. It doesn't matter if you're big or small. Your risks are maybe different. You know, as a larger company, you may have juicier targets in terms of what data you're getting, whereas a smaller company, they might be after different things, maybe trying to extort money out of you, or you know, intercept invoices and stuff like that. But there's a popular meme in the cybersecurity industry that goes something like this. There are only 2 types of companies: those that know that they've been compromised and those that don't know. You know, larger companies, they might have the right policies in place, they might implement the right tools and have teams and budgets to sort of implement these policies. And it might seem like they're pretty secure, but you know, with the several widely reported breaches and attacks that even large companies have experienced, you know, you can tell that these companies are also vulnerable. What's quite often the case, though, is that IT personnel often have to wear many hats. You know, there is a little bit of a skill shortage in South Africa when it comes to IT, and so that IT teams are overstretched, and you know, budget-wise, they don't always have all the right amount of money to implement the best tools, right? Couple this with the fact that in a business, you know, doing business is what's important. Production is king. And often you have cobbled together systems which don't always follow the best practices. The problem can be worse in small and medium enterprises as well. This is where often, you know, IT teams can be a single person or a very small team that is even more overstretched than in larger enterprises. And, you know, the company teams, they don't have, you know, in smaller businesses, you don't have CTOs who are making decisions and are technically knowledgeable, so that the people who have to make decisions on what tools to buy, which directions to go in terms of securing their infrastructure, often not that technically knowledgeable. You know, many smaller companies, they often make use of consumer grade tools to save money. You know, these are fine for protecting your personal device like your laptop at home, but you know, they don't help you deploy unified policies that help protect a whole bunch of devices for your employees. Couple this with the fact that the pandemic and the general shift to remote working, it's exposed a whole slew of new risks to businesses, both large and small. You know, in the past, it was enough to have your edge protection, your perimeter protection, firewalls, expensive kit to protect your little secure enclave. But now your perimeter is extended into everyone's homes, your employees' homes, the coffee shops, those sorts of areas. And now you got to protect those devices, right? And some companies were better prepared for remote work. They had VPN set up, access control enabled, but many were sort of caught short by this, and they had to just rush to implement remote working, and the work part of it, doing the work, getting the job done, was the priority. So security was often an afterthought, right? And as you mentioned upfront, Elaine, you know, cybercrime in South Africa is, you know, South Africa is particularly a favorable target for cyber criminals because our laws are not always in place to help you know, the laws are often inadequate, and there's also very little pressure and motivation and skilled personnel available in the authorities to investigate and prosecute cybercrime. You know, cybercrime is also, it's transnational now, so you don't have to worry about only worry about your local you know, South African criminals. You've got to worry about everyone around the world. There's only you know, 200 to 300 milliseconds away at most that they can sort of start attacking you from anywhere around the world. Yeah, so I would say that there are risks, and the risks are ever changing. So you know, you just got to be aware that everyone is at risk of cybercrime.
Gosh, the way you make it sound, it's almost like a boogeyman. But I think you make some very, very valid points there. Let's move on to the next question. So, I mean, Akona, let's just touch on some of the companies, right? So Nick talked about, about some of these IT managers being stretched and wearing many hats and having to do all sorts of different things. Generally speaking, how do you think companies are currently protecting themselves, and what are the common things that you believe are being overlooked?
Thank you so much, Elaine. So, I mean, like Nick has just said, security is something that is important for everyone, for every company, whether you're big or small, it is going to affect you some way or another. So, I mean, before the COVID-19 pandemic, you will find companies that they were actually focusing more on protecting their environments through the use of firewalls by keeping the malicious attacks out of their network. Some of these companies also installed endpoint protection to their necessary devices, while some may have implemented things like security policies at end user level by allowing certain users within a company to have access to certain applications. But because truth be told, not everyone actually needs to access everything that within the company. So they also, by enforcing things like security changes on their devices or laptops on a monthly basis, just to make sure that they stay up to date, and it does help as well protecting your own environment. This approach has actually worked quite well for some companies, but obviously with the sudden change with the pandemic hitting the country, actually the whole world, companies have actually and employees have actually been forced to work from home. And this actually changed a lot of things within the company, whereby they were now forced to reevaluate their approach on security, because now employees were seen, or they were not sitting behind the company's firewall, and they were now connecting outside the company's organization. That cannot be guaranteed that it is actually 100% or adequately secured. So some of the things that people have can say companies or people have overlooked would be the companies or the employees inside the company as well. So it is very important that companies spend time in teaching people about cybersecurity within their organizations and how to be able or how to spot attacks when they come, because we get a lot of phishing emails coming from our outside for people trying to attack the company's database. So if you teach your staff, your employees, that how they can be able to spot such phishing emails, and then not to just open a link that they don't even know what is going to be there, and try to choose them. If they believe that there's a phishing email that is coming out, they can just try and contact their IT department so that they are aware there is some phishing attack that is coming out there. Also, securing data that is not system generated as well within the companies is also another thing that a lot of people overlook. I mean, we get data that is not generated, or that a company cannot guarantee that it's safe. So all of these things, they don't sit in a neat database that a company's IT department can be able to trace. So data that sits on endpoint devices needs to be encrypted as well. So it is very simple. You get softwares like Windows 10, which comes with BitLocker, which is also embedded or built in, or it's a built-in feature onto Windows. So this actually helps in actually strengthening your security, because it actually encrypts things like your disk within your machine. On the topic of securing your data, it's important as well to know where your people are storing their data as well, because your company's data should sit in a storage that a company can be able to control or manage as well. So some of the free online file storage services that you find, they are not 100%. They are not 100% or adequately secure. So these things people actually need to look into as well, and be able to know that having backup data as well is also very important should you have problems with what you currently have stored, whether it be on a machine or on a different cloud service. Also protecting your mobile devices, because you see a lot of employees and just people in general. I mean, we are so used to the modern world, whereby we are so mobile with everything that we do, so much so that sometimes, even if I'm not at the office, I may be on the road, I'm going to see client, I'm accessing my emails on my cell phone. So also having protection for those devices is also very important. So companies, they need to think about how they can actually be able to manage such things if they find that some of the employees or companies within their employees within the company are actually using some, accessing some stuff or data within their mobile devices as well. And constantly being able to review your cybersecurity as a company is also very important, because we know how these things like, I think attackers, they are always like 10 steps ahead of companies or security services. So it's also very important that from time to time you always review your cybersecurity policy and to check if there are any updates that are needed. And along with this, you need to also test your cybersecurity as well. And also, lastly, to add, you must have a plan in place on when what you're going to do when things go wrong, because it's not a matter of if things go wrong. Like I think it was Nick who actually said it. It's something that is affecting not only your smaller companies, but even big corporates as well. Cyber attack can attack anyone. So it's very important that you have a backup solution in place. Should anything go wrong, you know that you have a plan that is put in place as well.
Thanks, Akona. That is very comprehensive. Gosh, I mean, yeah, there's so much I think that companies need to do nowadays. It just complicates the whole cybersecurity environment, but everything is very important. Akona, let's stay with you for the next question. So we know the times are tough, and really cybersecurity is a little bit like insurance, right? We all know we need it, but we don't really want to spend too much money on it. So there's a lot of use of consumer security products in the market, and actually Nick briefly touched on this a little bit earlier. Are these actually going to be good enough in the context of a small business, or do they need to actually upgrade to a business grade piece of software? Akona, sorry, do you mind unmuting yourself, please?
Sorry about that. Elaine, the truth is, like you just said, obviously for smaller companies, they might feel that using your consumer grade products or free online services as security is adequate for them. But the truth is, you can only rely on that as if you are just a startup company and you are the only one working within your company, because you know that there's no additional person that you need to be worried if they're doing the right thing or not. But as the more your business grows and the more you employ or add new people within your company, then that is when you actually would try to reconsider the type of security that you have in place. I mean, these companies, they get attracted to the free services or consumer goods services because of the attractive price points that are in place. I mean, these consumer products will offer a good level of protection to your devices, like I said, if you're a startup company. But as soon as you start introducing other people within the company, the management becomes a very important thing as well. So that is why it would be a better option to try and upgrade to more of a business or enterprise grade security solutions, which will also give you the ability to cover certain things that consumer solutions cannot be able to cover, such as security for your servers as well. I mean, we get things like with the latest technologies, things like machine learning and artificial intelligence that are also being built into business and enterprise offerings as well. So this is another way that you get companies that are developing all these enterprise solutions, that this is another way that they are trying to make sure that organizations are moving forward towards, and also helping them staying protected with all their data within their company. So yes, they would find that it's going to work for a small company or someone who's starting up, but the more you have more than one person within a company, then you need to start ensuring that you strengthen your security, because you can never be too sure what the other person is doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a big takeaway from that is, you know, what we see amongst our resellers is a lot of them buying some of the consumer security solutions and literally coming to us for, you know, 4 or 5 user packs. And what we need to do as a channel is to say to our customers, actually, you know, this consumer security solution might be cheap and it'll get you the basics. But you know, when you buy 4 or 5 packs of 5 packs, that's 20 to 25 users. You know, this is actually not a good enough solution to keep yourself completely protected. Because let me tell you, the cost of downtime is much more costly than the cost of any security solution in the market, because these cyber criminals aren't shy to ask for more, right? Because if you don't have access to your data, that can literally shut down your business. Mish from Microsoft. Yeah. Yes, Akuna?
No, I just wanted to add on that as well, is that I mean, most of the times you find that people are more concerned about the price component of what they need to do, whereby it's better to actually stay protected than to actually lose out even more when you actually do get attacked.
Absolutely. Michelle from Microsoft. So look, I mean, it's no secret, Microsoft had made some massive investments locally in terms of launching your data centers. And with the lockdown, we saw some very tactical digital transformation happening en masse. And we saw a lot of customers taking up offerings in the public cloud. Talk to us for a second about how secure the cloud actually is.
100%. So Elaine, that's actually quite it's a really good question. We get constantly asked by customers, how secure is the cloud? And I think there's a perception out by many customers that it's an unknown. And I think now with the pandemic and with COVID, I mean, there's been a mass acceleration in cloud usage, and as you've kind of put to that point. So public cloud is extremely secure. And I think you also need to look at it from different aspects, right? When you say, is public cloud secure, there's an operator's responsibility from a securing perspective, right? So that's really kind of say the Azure cloud and everything that needs to go into there. And secondly, there's actually also a component from a customer perspective, right? In terms of saying, can I actually also enhance and switch on the policies and processes needed from these cloud solutions to also enhance the safety of the cloud? So when we start looking at it from an operator's perspective, we really look at it across different spheres. So the first sphere is actually the physical sphere. So when you start looking at the data centers and you start thinking, there's these massive data centers and, we've invested in South Africa, are they actually safe? And what processes and what policies does Microsoft have to ensure that should there be a natural disaster, should there be an electricity concern, should there be insiders trying to get in, is it secure from a physical perspective? And when I say that there's military grade security around our data centers, and I think not just ours, I think any other cloud providers data centers, there really is. So I can talk from Microsoft's standpoint to say that they've almost taken a kind of a 0-day kind of thought into all of the data centers worldwide in terms of ensuring that the cloud is constantly up and live. Even to the point of events that you may think are not even realistic. And let me put it that way. So if there was to be a zombie apocalypse, what would happen? What would the X, Y, or Z be? If there was a massive surge from a tsunami, what would that be? All of those have actually been taken into account. So from a physical perspective, the cloud is extremely secure. Then we start looking at, access control and kind of, telemetry and securing the environment from outsider threats also coming in. So the investments, as you said, and I think that's key to also note, is there are, I think, not millions, billions of investments that have gone into securing the infrastructure, and the amount of professionals and telemetry that is constantly being monitored to ensure that the securing of that environment is more so than what it can be, and every day getting better and better. It's there. So when I also take a kind of a view of, like almost that zero standing effect, can any employee in Microsoft just go in and take my data? That's actually a question that we do get from saying, is the public cloud safe? And, the answer to that is no, we have no access. The security, the privacy, the encrypting, all of that comes into place. So when you look at a public cloud and you look at it across the spheres of physical networking and kind of securing and monitoring, extremely highly invested in, constantly evolving, multiple millions of resources, being put towards that. So yes, definitely public cloud is safe. But when we look on the consumer side, as safe as the public cloud is, if you don't have, and it's come up in this conversation, the basic policies enabled, something such as a phishing attack coming in and not having safe links, something as small as that can make or deem the public cloud not to be safe because someone got into your environment. So there's also kind of the switching on of the tools and the policies from the customer's perspective that are there, and that's where the partners kind of guide the customers to ensure that that security hardening is there. But from an operator perspective, definitely I have faith in public cloud. I know it's definitely secure. And then just from the customer to assist in aiding kind of their environment securing as well. And that's with the aid of the partners.
I think if I had to add on to that, you really need to think about the cloud vendors that you're choosing to partner with, right? So from a Microsoft perspective, absolutely secure. There's a lot of vendors out there, offering cloud solutions, but not offering the same kinds of security from an operator's perspective as what a Microsoft is. So I guess my advice to anyone who's listening would really to be careful in how you choose your vendors and make sure you know what you're getting yourself into. Simon, let's hand over to you for the next one. And this is actually related to what Michelle had talked about. So, Michelle mentioned that it's the operator's responsibility to manage certain aspects of the security. But what do organizations still need to do from their side to make sure that their investments into public cloud is still secure?
Yeah, so I think Michelle, touched on, specifically Microsoft, Azure cloud being sort of, protected on their data center itself. AWS also mentioned, they're securing the data centers, but the cloud workloads within, your tenants are the ones that you need to secure. I think customers are actually forgetting that they need to actually put in the controls in place to actually secure their workloads and make sure that they're not having storage buckets that are open. And I mean, we take a look at some of the breaches in the past where Uber was breached because somebody didn't encrypt their storage, and that was a big concern that was uncovered. So misconfiguration, specifically in the cloud security sort of front, is generally a big concern for customers. And I think some researchers from a well-known cloud security organization, they actually did research specifically on the breach itself, and they estimated $5 trillion were lost within a year because of data breaches. And I mean, that's a massive amount. Some of the other things that Michelle touched on is making sure that you have those controls enabled. Is that organizations are relying on their cloud teams to spin up workloads as quickly as possible, but are they actually automating the security in place? Are they throwing in the native security? Are they actually making sure that is secure? The other problem is, now you're looking at cloud to cloud. So now you're looking at, data transversing from, Azure to AWS. How is that data being moved? Is that data being secured? And that's a big problem that the guys are facing. And, trying to automate that type of security in place is key, but also you need to now start relying on, maybe looking at, cloud access security brokers to actually identify what data is actually being, shared within the cloud platform. And then also touching base, I mean, I know that it's not within the cloud, but actually talking about shadow IT. I mean, guys, organizations are concerned about shadow IT, specifically focusing on, users downloading, cloud apps to do specific things, specifically focusing on, a user might be looking for a PDF converter, but they don't read the terms and conditions, and the data that they're putting into that PDF converter is actually confidential data, which can now be shared in the cloud because that's their policy. So there's a lot of things that sort of really look into place, and I guess misconfiguration is a main thing. Customers need to realize that yes, Microsoft, AWS are securing the data center, but they're not securing within the workloads itself, and that's reliant on the customer to do so.
Thanks, Simon. So we actually have a question from the audience. So Karen asked, good morning. What would you say is a major threat in concern with cloud? Can you take that on, please, Simon?
I mean, like I said, misconfiguration is the biggest concern. Is making sure that I guess specifically, are your credentials are using are you securing the credentials itself? So are you using stricter passwords along those lines? Are you allowing the permissions to specific users itself? You're not allowing everyone to have full admin access to the cloud. And I think the biggest worry that I guess customers are facing is that the cost of cloud. So users are spinning up workloads within Microsoft or AWS, and sometimes it's a pay-as-you-go service, So at the end of the month, you land up in a situation where, guys have spun up workloads, which has now cost the business more, but those were really for testing point of view. So, and then also you're looking at guys trying to use the cloud to mine for, crypto, and, they're using organizations to do that, and generally that's coming through from a phishing campaign or something along those lines, and it then actually the guys then get access to the organization's cloud front, and they're now spinning up I guess crypto miners to actually gain data. So yeah, there's a big concern there.
I don't know how we're going to sleep at night after this webinar, after listening to everybody talk about the major points. I actually, while Michelle was talking just now, I was thinking to myself, I would really like to know Microsoft's plan around the zombie apocalypse, because I think that's quite a unique scenario. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Let's see. Akona, so cybersecurity has evolved over the last few years, and it's important that IT service providers keep up with the changes. The biggest change, I think, with the shift to the cloud is that in the cloud world, identity becomes really important, and maybe it's even more important than worrying about the corporate network. So Akona, can you please explain why this is so important and how you go about protecting identity?
Wow, that's a very important question, Elaine. Especially right now with technology moving and drastically so to the cloud, and not just focusing on cloud technology alone, but identity protection is very important. So there needs to be some sort of a policy within each and every company or every organization around this whole issue. It is very important, especially for the IT department and also for HR, to have some sort of open line communication, so that the company can be able to ensure that only current employees have access to the company's resources. And on top of this, not only that, implementing things like role-based access is also very important, because not everyone within a company needs to have access to everything. And another thing that people might need to consider as well, every company, is the use of multi-factor authentication in their environment. Multi-factor authentication, it can be done through by using your cell phone through an SMS. You can use an email verification or sent through an email. You can also use an authenticator app as well. This is actually a two-step verification process, or a tool or a service, whatever you want to call it, whereby the user actually grants access to their devices or portals through through their cell phones. So basically, you get a notification. It can be a code, or through your cell phone, an SMS, it can be through an email. Then you have to enter onto that machine that you are trying to log into, or to that specific portal. So it actually also helps in strengthening the way a person is actually logging into their machine. It means that no one can just be able to log in onto their machine. And another thing is, it's very important, especially currently, whereby a lot of people are now still working from home. There are still a lot of companies that are accessing companies' resources or data outside their company's firewall. So the use of multi-factor authenticator is very important, especially for remote workers that are maybe connecting through an online account or just through a VPN. So use of such services is very important to make sure that you are strengthening the security that you have within your organization.
No, absolutely. And if I look at what the vendors are doing, so with Microsoft, they put in requirements that if you want to access Partner Center, that there is a fundamental requirement that you have multi-factor authentication switched on. If I look at the Acronis Cloud Portal, same thing. There's an option for you to turn multi-factor authentication on. And to be honest, I think where possible, if this is an option for you, I would absolutely put it on, because let's face it, passwords are just not secure anymore, right? We have so many portals that we need to have access to, that a lot of people be reusing passwords, which is obviously a big security red flag. And also a lot of passwords are easily guessable. If you look at some of the social engineering tricks that are used on social media, so if you've ever seen a post on Facebook to talk about, the street where you grew up, or post here for your favorite color, or your pets, your childhood pet's name. These are all social engineering tricks to help to get around some of those security questions. So it's really important that people are aware. So multi-factor authentication, if I bring this back, really important. And we've also seen a lot of the banks actually implement it so that we always know that the right person is logging in. Nick, earlier you talked a little bit around remote working, I think in the first question that we'd asked you. So, I mean, given that we've seen a lot of lockdowns around the world and we saw our own severe lockdown, people started to have to work from home, right? And I think it was you or Simon who said that what we did was we put work first and we put security second. So it really now we have a situation that's really tricky for IT managers to manage, because before pandemic, people were sitting very neatly behind a corporate network. So you could put in the necessary firewalls to block out the bad traffic. So what do IT managers do now to ensure security in a remote workforce?
Yes, remote working is here, and I think it's here to stay for some. I see more and more people are going back to offices, but I think some people will continue to remote work, or there'll be some sort of hybrid. So it's important to get an idea of how to secure that. As I kind of mentioned, the identity is the new edge, and you've got to maintain the integrity of your employees' identities and how they access devices. The mobile devices and laptops and workstations stuff are portals to your company's data now, right? So while you can't easily control your employees' home networks, you can't go in there and easily insist that they upgrade to the latest corporate firewall, and they ban they create multiple networks on their system, so that you have network segregation and all that fancy stuff that you'd replicate in your corporate environment. You can basically give your employees some sort of training and knowledge about how to do basic security for their home networks. So things like changing default passwords, changing the default SSID of the Wi-Fi. Maybe even give them. We spoke a little bit about using business grade tools for cybersecurity, but also offer them the free and AV tools, or the cheaper consumer grade AV tools for the devices of the people who are living in their household, the children, the roommates, etc. Because you don't know who else is on that network and what threats that they might have on their systems. Right. The next important thing, though, is, of course, have a strict policy, a company policy, a comprehensive, reasonable policy about what employees can and can't do with company policies. Property, sorry. Your laptops and mobile, or if the company provides a mobile device, for instance, these are company policy. This is company property, and the data that resides on them and that they have access to is, it belongs to the company, and you can't just have, letting their friends access their laptop to look at Facebook, or let their kids play. Download games and play on them, on your company laptop that's now in the employee's home. You need to be clear how company data can be accessed, who can access it, when they can access it, and how it must be stored. Can they download the data and put it on a flash drive to go load it on their home computer to do the printing, for instance, or something? You need to have those policies in place to make sure that employees understand that it is quite serious, and they need to take data protection and what they do with company data seriously. You can use great tools, so I would suggest things like remote management tools and management and monitoring tools to ensure that the mobile devices are up to date, patched constantly. As we mentioned, use enterprise antivirus software, so you can apply broad policies that are easy to configure and apply across an entire system. Make sure that the access is through VPNs, etc. So that you are securing that edge device, because you don't have control out in the field, or as much control out in the field. So protecting those edge devices are important, and use the tools that are available. They are as I mentioned that, there's a lot of threats out there, but there are tools from, across the vendor spectrum that you can use to help you secure your devices. Mobile device management is also an important tool that you should enroll your devices in those in mobile device management tools to be able to track and control them, be able to remote wipe systems if they get stolen. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Nick. I think some really good points there. For me, one of the most important points actually is around educating your people, right? So teach them how to change their SSIDs, teach them how to change default usernames and passwords on routers, because I think, a lot of the vendors use very similar passwords. I mean, if you used a certain brand, all routers in that brand will have the same username and password, which means that actually you could probably just guess it because there are only so many brands. I want to actually move on to something else that's been quite topical. So we're talking about POPI, so the Protection of Personal Information Act. So now that's officially been passed into law this year, but businesses have until next year, I think it's June, to actually put all the necessary policies and practices in place to properly comply. So Michelle, I've seen that Microsoft has sent out some messaging around POPI. Can you talk about how POPI impacts the average South African business and what they need to do from a security standpoint to comply with POPI?
100%. So yes, no, I mean, there's a lot of questions coming in from POPI currently from our customers, and I think there's also a lot of kind of uncertainty with POPI now coming in. So POPI is really going to change end customers in the way that they actually process, store, and kind of utilize personal information. So usually, in POPI, you'll get three agents. You'll firstly get the individual, such as myself, Michelle. You'll get the company that is I've given authority to utilize or to take my data, and that could be anyone. It could be its own MTN, it could be a Vodacom, it could be any consumer or business kind of entity, and then you're going to get the operator as well that also has a responsibility. But what it's going to do a lot for kind of the end customer or those organizations now is that they have to ensure that they fully secure all PII. So PII, when it's at rest, when it's in use, and when it's in transit, now has to be stored. And what we find from a security perspective is a lot of customers have been thinking of security from a cybersecurity, kind of threat agent, what are the threat vectors, how are they trying to get in, and how to kind of secure them from there. I think what's going to happen now is it's going to be an enhanced magnifying glass on the actual data perspective, because everyone's storing personal information. Now, as Michelle's personal information, how is my ID actually moving around in an organization? How can I actually ensure that Michelle's ID does not move between different individuals? And when we start talking like that, we actually have had a lot of conversations with customers and starting to say, what sensitive data do you have? And something as basic as data classification is what we're finding as a huge need for support in the customer base in South Africa at the moment. A lot of companies actually have not classified their data. And I think POPI starts with that. It starts with knowing what data from a personal perspective from an end customer needs to be, kind of classified to be stored and protected. So for me, it's really, I think, POPI is changing the way that organizations think of their data estates, what is happening, how it's shared. Something as simple as, if we think of it, sending an ID through Teams, can Michelle actually send Elaine's ID through Teams to, say for instance, to a corner, or is she actually not actually allowed to? Does that stay with only in a certain department and not move? So those kind of intricacies are very delicate now with POPI, and those can become breaches, right? So I think the utilization of the security stack from a phishing and a ransomware, kind of perspective now is kind of elevated into this encryption kind of, sensitivity, total kind of security view. So that's where I think the requirements are changing, and that's where I think it's going to now elevate. The one thing as well with POPI, which is really important to also take into consideration, is the insider risk. So you also got to now start looking at security from an insider risk perspective, because that's also where, data leakage occurs and where a massive risk to organizations actually lies. So from external, right, we know that all these threat actors come in and they want to extract data. That's what cyber criminals do. Data is key, it's gold to them. But internally, who are the insider, that now could potentially also utilize this data? So insider risk tools and securing is going to be quite prevalent, even to the point of physical. So does Michelle leave her PC on with Elaine's ID number, on display while she goes quickly to make a cup of tea? that can already be a breach, because all of a sudden I have leaked your personal information. Do I leave a paper that's printed on my desk with an application from a corner and all of her personal details on it? That's also going to become really, really important. So, I mean, I think to conclude, I think the security requirements and kind of what customers need to look at and what's going to be pertinent is this data in transit, data in use, and data in rest methodology, and taking the compliance view of how do they secure that, and on top of that, how do they analyze it and ensure that there's constant gap analysis to ensure that they are actually keeping personal data into a streamlined, secure state that is required by our legislation.
I think you've raised some really important points there, Mish. Thank you very much for that. And some really interesting ones, right? So I really love that you talked about, that potentially you wrote my ID number on a piece of paper, because actually I think that's something that a lot of people actually don't think about, right? How often do you go into meetings and people literally still bringing pen and paper into the meeting, and what data is being stored in the notebook? Can you imagine, going into the bathroom and putting your notebook, on the side there because you just need to quickly wash your hands, and then actually forgetting it when you walk out, and how much data is actually in that physical notebook? I guess time to move on to tools like OneDrive to actually make sure that the data is in a secure place. I wanted to just keep on this topic of POPI, Mish. So we've actually got a question from Justin in the audience. So he says, "Hi there. In terms of POPI, do doctors become liable for loss of data, or does it fall onto the management providers backing up the data?"
No, so I mean, that's actually quite a really good question, because the onus is actually going to lie on the doctor as well. So the onus is going to lie on the chain from the parties. So if my data, for instance, is with X doctor and the backup is broken, that doctor is actually liable because he's the service provider directly to myself as the individual. What will happen is there will also be implications from the doctor to the provider who was backing it up that potentially, have faulted. But that backup provider is seen as an operator. So there's different requirements from when you're talking operator to kind of the actual agent, right? So kind of the doctor or who's actually you've given authority to give the data to, and then the actual individual. But the doctor would be liable, and there would potentially be liabilities as well should there have been breach by the operator.
Thanks, Michelle. So really important that that people understand that they're not exempt from POPI regulations just because they have a service provider. The onus is still on the organization to make sure that they've met all the necessary compliance bits and pieces, and they need to make sure that they have proper contracts in place with service providers that will cover them and to hold service providers responsible should something go wrong if processes haven't been followed. So really important, I think, is that organizations need to read through all of the fine print. So I remember a couple of years ago, I had a customer chat to me about a reseller chatting about one of his end customers that had been hit by ransomware. So the end customer thought to themselves, well, you know what, it's fine, we have backups. And only to find out later on that the contract that said they signed only signed up for monthly backups. So you can imagine that this company's lost potentially a whole month's worth of data because they didn't read through the T's and C's. So really important. We actually have another question from the audience. So Karen's asking another question. Looking at the ways things are these days, do you think the antivirus are available are good enough for the threats that are surfacing? And is the IT department prepared for the threats? So Simon, I'm going to hand over to you on this.
Yeah, I guess it all depends on if the AV solution that they're currently using have the capabilities. I mean, the way you hear about organizations talk about next-gen AVs, and when you talk about next-gen AVs, has it got machine learning, AI intelligence? It's not relying just on signatures at the moment. And in some concerns that customers are facing is that they don't turn all the controls on, or they turn some of the features off because it's impacting an in-house application. But in that case, they should be sort of creating an exclusion where they can actually exclude the application. So I mean, traditionally, some of the AVs on the market at the moment are good enough. It's just making sure that best practice has been enforced ensure that that's all being secured and put in place.
Thank you for that, Simon. Let's see. So for my next question, I think I'm going to ask this to Nick. So so for me, what's been really interesting is over the last couple of years, we've run a lot of events around software, and of course, we always talk around security. And over the course of these events, I often ask resellers to raise their hand if they know somebody who's been hit by ransomware. And every year we ask this, we actually see more and more hands going up. So it almost feels like we're all sitting ducks, right? To your point earlier, there's only two types of organizations, right? Ones that have been hit by ransomware, ones that don't know they've been hit by ransomware. So when you're looking at security policies, it's important that you have both preventative and responsive measures in place. So Nick, can you talk to us a little bit about some of these responsive policies? What should one do if their business does get hit by ransomware? Do you just pay the ransom and be on your merry way and hope that the attackers actually give you your data back?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, I suppose, and it can become $1 million these days if you see the how much some of the ransomware criminals are asking for. So assuming some basic practical advice, assuming the worst case scenario happens, you've got all the breaches, all the defenses in place, but you've still been breached. You now have you have a ransomware notification on one of your systems, or one of your employees notices that the AV pops up and says, some data has been encrypted or something like that. The very first thing you want to do is to contain that system, right? You want to remove it from the network entirely, immediately. That should be like the very first step that the employee takes before they, call out, phone IT and say there's a problem. They should be trained that this is what you've got to do, right? Then you should immediately work on to isolate all your other devices, especially your core infrastructure where your data is stored. Bring everything else offline. But a critical thing to note is not to power the devices down necessarily, because some ransomware can actually detect that the device has been powered down, and it can actually render the system inoperable. You won't be able to boot after that. The next step is secure your backups. If you've got backups, secure them. Isolate those. Make sure that they are untouched. Remove them. If you have to unplug the network from the devices, do that. Then you can start assessing the damage and figure out which systems has been affected. Now, the next thing is depending if you're going to involve the authorities to investigate and try and find out exactly what's going on, or if you have some sort of insurance and they require and they need to investigate, those sorts of things. Then the steps differ, right? So you might want to start recovering immediately to get back up and running, and because downtime is expensive, as you mentioned, Elaine. But you do want to make sure that you've quarantined and cleaned all the devices that are infected, so that you don't, that the ransomware is not hidden dormant somewhere, and then as soon as you recover, you get hit again. Right? If you have clean backups and you've removed the threat, you can start recovering. I personally think it's better to do a clean restore if you've got. To do a complete restore rather than just relying on the decryption of the data. As you mentioned, if you can pay the ransomware, the ransom, and maybe the attacker gives you the keys. I know that there was some bugs in the decryptors from one of the ransomware groups had a bug where it would basically it would mangle the data slightly. It would remove one bit from the end of the binary file or something, and it would render the certain file types corrupted. So you can't always rely on that. They're quite skilled programmers, the ransomware guys, but they're not too concerned about your data so much. Right, so you start your recovery process. Parallel to this, though, you may want to start investigating as well, finding out what the attack vector, whether it came through an email, or whether someone was sitting in your environment for a while, because that's what we're seeing now. Is people are hiding in your environment, assessing the threats. They're even selling access to people who want to extract your data, and this is quite a big thing. Right. If possible, take snapshot backups of the backed up the encrypted systems, so that you can investigate for forensic investigations later. And also, there's a possibility down the line that if you don't have your RPO, your recovery point objective is too spaced out, there may be a free decryptor later on down the line that you can then decrypt that data just to get some critical data that you may not have backed up. You can get that back. As you mentioned, I typically don't recommend paying the ransom because it does perpetuate the problem. It also funds criminals, and you're never guaranteed to get the data back. But this is obviously a decision that a company needs to make on its own. I know that laws are changing, particularly in the US, about whether you can pay or some certain groups are sanctioned, and so you can't necessarily pay that. So I don't know if that doesn't necessarily apply here, but you got to be careful about that. But if you need to pay the ransom, you can negotiate on that. Right now, from a preventative point of view, I feel that we all need a ransomware response plan, like a fire emergency plan. When there's a fire or something in a building, you need to have a ransomware attack response plan. You need to do drills. I mean, I don't want to be to exaggerate this too much, but it is something that your employees need to know what to do when they suspect ransomware. They need to what the steps are to take immediately, because it will happen at some point. I'm pretty sure everyone's going to, the security tools are very good at preventing and stopping it, but you just need to know. They should know how to isolate the individual systems. You don't need to train your employees to be securing your whole network and stuff like that, but how to isolate their systems if they suspect that, and then what to do immediately. So they isolate the systems and they immediately go tell IT that there's a problem. And I think you should have that a policy and a plan, and you should practice it, so that the employees know what to do. And then part of that plan should also be the steps you take on how to isolate and secure backups, clean, and then do recoveries. So that's how my recommendations for what happens if you get a ransomware, the practical steps, and just formulate a plan now, starting now. If you haven't been hit yet, start formulating a plan of what you're going to do.
I love that you talked about doing drills, Nick, because I mean, if you think about it, all companies need to do fire drills because that's one possible source of a catastrophe, right? But same thing with ransomware. So I think that's a really good. So thank you very much for that. Mish, I think earlier you talked a little bit about shadow IT. So I actually want to bring it back here now, because business tech is so complicated, right? There's so many tools that people are using within the business. In the last few years, I've read a lot of articles around shadow IT, which creates some really complications for business environments, right, from a security and compliance standpoint. And if you think about it, and actually ironically, if you implement really strict IT security policies, that actually might end up encouraging shadow IT as people look for solutions that will actually do what they need to do. So what do you think are the best practices to monitor and manage shadow IT? And are there any tools that you can recommend to help to mitigate the risk?
100%, Elaine, and it is, if the stronger the policy, sometimes the more people try to also find angles in to utilize. And look, to me, the best practice is to actually create a shadow IT policy that's kind of flexible between different departments, because and I come from an environment pre-Microsoft where I think we had a hell of a lot of shadow IT because everyone had a different application and a different SaaS, solution that they want, marketing versus sales versus, and everyone was just downloading and utilizing all these different kind of solutions, which is an IT nightmare because yes, you're not secure, it's not authorized, and it's going to lead to massive problems in the future. But the best practice is literally to almost have from a recommendation. So say there's a department within an organization and they want to use an application, is to almost have a process of recommendation and endorsement and testing and monitoring by IT. So it's not for IT to shut down and say you can only have these apps. Yes, I think that needs to be from a perspective that right now we only have these. You would like to use alternative apps, and then there's kind of a process that's linked as IT as almost kind of the heartbeat from an endorsement and monitoring and testing with that department. If that happens, it allows there to be flexibility firstly, and secondly, it allows those applications to be approved, monitored and endorsed, which is where the problem comes in, right? And there's a lot of tools that actually, allow this. And I think shadow IT also has crept in with a lot of organizations with bring your own devices and people sitting at home and, kind of just downloading what they need to and utilizing. But, cloud app security is firstly, really a fundamental tool that needs to be utilized, ensuring that you have kind of this authentication of apps, you blocking risky apps from being just downloaded without them having been on an endorsed or consented list by an organization. These open authentication applications that are just put in as well, ensuring that you actually have cloud app security to kind of monitor those and stop those, and detecting, right, any anonymous behavior. Because sometimes, you know, we say that policies are too strict, but is it actually someone from an organization that's planting an app on that device, or kind of a, you know, what we see as shadow IT application, or is it actually a bad agent actually also implementing that in? So you also need to have those blockings. So a strong, firm shadow IT policy endorsed by products such as, you know, a kind of a cloud app security and Intune, so a mobile device management system as well, to ensure that you can also secure what is corporate versus non-corporate on bring your own devices, allowing that to also have kind of a distinguished line between. And things such as, you know, AD, like authentication, ensuring that you do have authentication in there as well, and endpoint security. I think if you go across those four, you're really going to secure yourself from a shadow IT perspective quite hardened and quite well. And secondly, you're also going to have the openness for there to be flexibility in an organization, just it needs to take an approved path before it's kind of presented itself into the organizational environment.
Thanks for that, Mish. Nick, I want to come back to you. So there's obviously been a lot of very highly publicized attacks in the last few years. If I think about a South African context, I think the latest one was the Experian breach. So what's your advice for the viewer today on how to avoid some of these disastrous situations?
Yeah, well, the Experian breach, from what I understand, was the result of someone impersonating an authorized person to obtain the data. They just walked in and asked for it, pretended to be someone, right? And you know, that just goes to show that not all your threats are, you know, technologically based. You know, it's not always going to be someone implanting malware or sending ransomware or hacking into your systems and extracting data. It's not always going to be like that. You know, sometimes it's just it's a human problem, right? And the data is what the attackers are after, whether they want to steal it or prevent you from having access to it, or just manipulating it for other nefarious purposes, right? So what we want to try is preventing your data breaches. And how do we do that? Is you got to know your data. You got to know where it's stored, who has access to it, and when they access it. You know, that's also an important part. If someone's accessing your data at 2 in the morning, are they just a really late worker, or is, you know, someone siphoning out your data? You need to know that sort of stuff. A big problem, as mentioned, I think it relates to shadow IT, but it was also data sprawl. You know, your data sprawls all over the place, and you have multiple copies of sensitive data in places where you don't even know where it is now, and it's difficult to keep track of. This can be a problem. So you need to focus on consolidating your data so that you know, IT and the people responsible for your data know where it is, and then you need to make sure that you have policies in place. Does everyone need an offline copy of your client spreadsheet or something like that? You know, do they need to have multiple copies? You know, if you don't know where your data is stored, you know, you don't know who has access to it. Have controls in place about, yeah, as mentioned, have controls in place about who can access it. You know, does each, it's been mentioned many times before, but does every department need to access all that specific information? You need to have policies in place about how it can be transferred. Can it be emailed out? Are you allowed to put it on a removable drive and travel with it physically? And these things will come into place when PAPIR comes into force as well. You need to, you know, all reputable cloud providers have audit logs that you can use to keep track of that data, who's accessing, how that data has been changed. And this is important, is you need to lock down your data. We can all talk about have these tools, have the software installed in place that does this and prevents antivirus, have firewalls on each device and stuff. But really, it's about controls and who has access to that data. Obviously, as I mentioned, tools. It's important that you maintain that your IT security from a software point of view. Keep your systems up to date and ensure you have antivirus and anti-malware in place with the appropriate controls in place. Like Simon mentioned, you know, people aren't setting up the AV properly all the time. You know, so you need to make sure that you have that in place. But you also don't want to be too strict on that. I mean, you don't want security to be this big policeman that says no to everything. So I think security needs to be approachable from that perspective. People, you need to encourage a relationship where employees can communicate with your security, so that you can have a reasonable security with the ability to actually do the work. Obviously, I would recommend backing up your data using the 3-2-1 rule. 3 copies of your data, 2 different media and 1 off-site. At the very least, make sure you got backups and they are secure. And then ensure access control with things like VPNs if people are accessing remotely. These are important things. I also want to just circle back onto maintaining identity integrity and using things like 2-factor authentication. Encourage the use of strong passwords. Even make use of there's a bunch of password management tools out there that you can make use of. And these are also all important things to make sure that you're controlling access to your data and you know who's accessing it and when and where from where they're accessing the data.
Thanks for that, Nick. I'm just going to take one more question from the audience. So Simon, this is from Karen again. What's the toughest malware you've ever come across, and how did you sort out the situation?
Sure. I don't know if I was able to sort it out, but I mean, we all touched on ransom. Ransomware is probably one of the key ones. And I guess, I think Nick touched on it briefly, specifically focusing on, do you pay the ransom or don't you? You look at, I think one of the most recent ransomware attacks that we saw was probably Garmin, the smartwatch or GPS company. I mean, they got a ransomware attack where, the guys, landed up where Garmin actually paid, I think it was a $10 million fine, or not fine, actually a ransom back to the hackers itself. So the problem when it comes down to specifically focusing or fighting the ransomware attacks is you don't have a key to decrypt the data, you're never going to be able to decrypt it. But taking from that is looking at how do you prevent it from happening again, is making sure that you have the controls in place, making sure that you got your next gen type of AV solutions in place, your I guess making sure the machine learning, that type of controls are in place, and also ensuring that the security awareness has been given to your users. I mean, making sure the users are aware of, when they receive an email, they shouldn't be clicking on every link. I think that's the biggest problem, is that we rely, solely on tools, but really the person behind the computer is probably the biggest one at risk. They're the ones who are actually the ones that, we talk about it being the human firewall. If they actually have access to, selecting things and clicking things and downloading applications, that's where our biggest problem is. And we need to, firstly start with ensuring that our users have the right sort of security awareness training, so that they, are in place of actually making sure they can identify a phishing attack of some sort.
Thanks for that, Simon. And I think that makes absolute sense, right? So we're seeing a lot of phishing attacks at the moment as Rectron. So loads of POs and invoice downloads coming in. So I think just really important that people are aware of what it actually looks like. And I think different ways to spot that. So actually understand who's sending you the information sending you the link, and should they be sending you an invoice, should they be sending you a PO, should they be sending you a performer, etc. Often also have a look at the times that these things are being sent out. So if somebody's sending you something at 2 a.m., it's unlikely that somebody's working at 2 a.m. So just be aware of that kind of thing and make sure you don't click. Akona, let's just round our list of questions off with you. So maybe you can tell us a little bit. So in your role as a solution sales specialist at Rectron, you work with a lot of resellers so you have quite a view of how end customers are being managed. So in your opinion, what role do you think resellers play in ensuring that their customers are secure, and what solutions do you think that end customers should be implementing?
Thanks for that question, Elaine. Wow, so yeah, I work with quite a lot of resellers, and I think it's very important, especially, as a reseller, you are in a better position to understand the technology trends, what's new, what works with what. You understand better than your end customer. So you are there to act as an advisor, basically just you bring out the whole solution to them. So it is very important that resellers, whenever they are working on a solution for a client or with their end users, they do offer additional security products to their end customers. It can be whether you are offering them a hardware solution, it can be cloud-based solution or a service to your customer. Please advise them that they actually need to take up additional security. You can try to offer them an entire solution that will protect their whole environment. Another thing with that we might actually look into, and I think with recently, like we just Simon just actually spoke about, as you as well, Elaine, on email attacks, whereby you get a link that is sent to you and is telling you, please go and download this. So email security is very, very important. So we've seen quite a lot of those phishing emails. So it is very important that you as a reseller, you advise your customers. I can see that you're buying a 365 exchange license, for example. Why don't you couple that with advanced threat protection, you know, for just to make sure that you add that added security that you need to protect your data within your environment. We can also use security softwares like endpoint protection, identity manager, which is also very important. And when you have all these things in place, you have that peace of mind knowing that at least your data and is secured somewhere. Should there be attacks, at least there is some that there's that it cannot be 100% obviously, but you are a step closer to having that security that you need. With endpoint protection, especially during this time whereby, like I said, I've been speaking on this with COVID-19, I mean, it changed everything. It just changed everyone's lives around. For companies, they had to adapt to working from home. Some companies have never done something like that. So if you have security like endpoint protection for your employees, which is very, very important, because I mean, an IT department of a company cannot guarantee that if a person is working from home, the network that they are connecting to, you cannot guarantee that they are adequately secured. So it is very important that you offer such solutions. And also another thing that end users, I mean resellers, might actually offer to their end users as well, is the training for the users that are going to be using, whether the devices or the software as well. They need to be aware, they need to be taught and be vigilant and aware of how they can be able to identify a phishing email or a spam email that if they open a link, it might compromise the entire company's data environment. So providing such to your employees is very important that you train them. And also, I'm that person. I'm very I'm very skeptical. I know on my machine, I know a lot of people have a feature whereby if you go into a certain portal, the moment you enter, you put in your URL, it automatically picks up your username and password. I'm one person who I don't even believe in the saving your password on a machine type of person. So if you can just try to teach people, your staff, within your organization, to understand that attackers are out there. They can go into anyone's email. It doesn't have to be someone who's at a high-end position within the company. It can come from someone, even me as a person who works in sales. It doesn't even have to go to you, Elaine, or to Spencer, but eventually they know that step by step they will eventually get what they're looking for. So it is very important that you have such measures in place, and also just bear in mind that before you can always get hit. It's not something, no one is immune to this thing. It's not a matter of, oh no, they're only looking out for big companies or big corporate companies. Anyone can be hit by this. I mean, if a company like you just said, Experian, there was also an Uber story that happened like a few months ago, if I'm not mistaken, but they were also attacked. So like I said, it's something that can happen to anyone, and it comes in ways that no one actually expected it to happen. So just try on your solution, offer them the entire range. Yes, some customers may have a bit of a financial, not everyone has that, money afloat to always make such decisions. but just make sure that at least there is some sort of protection that they have in place. I mean, like if you can, they can also start using and utilizing services that actually come embedded on the softwares that they use as well. So you find that some users or companies, I'll make an example with we spoke about BitLocker that comes with Windows 10. I'm pretty sure that there's someone out there who's not aware that the software that they're using currently offers that as well. So if you can try to as a reseller to make sure that you reiterate that information to your end customers, offer them what they don't know. Just tell them we have this in the market. Try it out because it's going to protect your data, your emails, and other stuff. It's very important that you have that, especially and obviously on your machines as well. Endpoint protection is very important. So yeah, they should try to and it's very good if you're dealing with companies like us, Rectron, we try to make sure that we can offer a company or an end user an entire solution from their hardware, software, security. Everything is in place. So it's a matter of having everything, sourcing everything all in one place.
Thanks, Akona. Thanks for that. That was very comprehensive. Okay, so I wanted to maybe just hand over to everyone around the table. Just what do you have any parting thoughts or one last piece of advice that you want to leave viewers with today before we close off? Mish, why don't we start with you?
Okay, perfect. Sorry, just trying to unmute. No, so I think, I mean, my parting thought is, when you're having a discussion with end customers or when you're looking at kind of, the security discussion, have it as a platform discussion. Have it as the kind of the data, the compliance and the security discussion as one as a whole. What we find is, when you start having the discussion from a full 360 view, it may not be that all elements may be required immediately, but you start actually securing the posture in a much larger scale, and also, to the benefit of the customer, to actually understand where the infiltration and kind of where the weaknesses could lie and where actually the legislation also lies, and in terms of their responsibility, right? So my piece of advice is, with a customer, start off with a platform discussion, across the ecosystem, see it as a security posture, and then slowly kind of break that down into the exact needs and where the current kind of fit is.
Thanks, Mish. Simon, do you have any last thoughts?
Yeah, I would. I think firstly start with the user, provide that security awareness to your users, and that's probably the first sort of defense that we can actually get in place. So that's what I'm just going to leave it as that.
Thanks, short and sweet, but absolutely agreed with you on that. Nick.
Sorry, just taking a mute. Yeah, my final thoughts are, you see, cyber protection as a complete solution. Not just antivirus, not just backup, not just managing your endpoints and things like that. You need to be secure on all fronts, and it may seem scary when we all talk about the threats and the dangers out there, but there are tools out there that you can offer to your customers, to your end users, that they can implement to protect themselves, at least to protect themselves in the best way possible. So my passing closing thoughts are, look at it as a complete holistic solution from a cyber protection point of view, rather than just individual. I have AV, or I have my backups, or I've locked down my file share or something like that. It's a complete solution. You need to think about it in that manner.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that single pane of glass approach is very relevant in this day and age. Akona, what about your parting thoughts?
Well, nothing lengthy to say, but just to say I'm going to use the old traditional term, which is prevention is better than cure. Though we're not curing anyone who's dying, but it's better to make sure that you have prevention measures in place before anything bad happens, because when you try to sort out an issue or an attack, it's going to cost you even more or even be more complicated. And also just another point that I didn't actually sort of missed out when I wanted to on the last question that you asked on the resellers part is end users, they can never have, I don't think you can have what you call enough backup. you can back up a backup that is already backed up, you know. So a person might say, no, I already have backup on my own local data center, or someone is backing up in a different data center. But what if that data center fails? What if something happens within your company, within your environment, and then the data center fails, or whatever data you have backed up, you have problems? So try to make sure that you have enough backup as possible, because like everyone on this call has said, you never know when you're going to get attacked. It's not a matter of it's never going to happen. Eventually, but hoping it won't happen. So you'd rather make sure that you are well protected, and yeah, just to make sure that everything is in place. And it, like Michelle just said, it shouldn't be just a conversation about just a solution. Make it a platform to your clients. Make them understand and see the value of what you're offering to them. Make them understand why it is important for them to have such things. And yeah, that's just that. Just make sure that you stay prevented before you get hit very hard.
Thanks for that, Akona. Absolutely agree. Hope is not a strategy, right? We need to have hard, tangible things to work on. So with that, thank you everybody so much for joining today's webinar, and thank you to my panelists. You guys have been amazing and offered some very, very good insights. And I'm sure that everyone watching has gotten some really good value out of this. My parting thought, if you're okay to hear it, is that you should just get in contact with my team if you need any help with regards to cybersecurity. You guys can't see it, but our corner is actually waving. So if you want to get in contact with my team, please contact them on nbl@rectron.co.za. Thank you very much, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you very much.